Welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. On our episode today, we are joined by Chetina Guadalupe. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, consultant, and the owner creator of Always Live Lovely. She is going to be sharing with us and talking through some of the reasons that Black birthing people and mothers might experience trauma in the healthcare system and how that impacts going into birth, even into pregnancy, but into birth and in the postpartum. She also touches a bit on her own experience. As you know, on this podcast, we do talk about really difficult things and situations and life experiences. And one of the things that Chetina touches on in the beginning of our conversation is really the complexity of emotional experience. That while some people might be experiencing sadness or fear, anger, that they might also be experiencing mixed in there relief and happiness and gratitude and many other things. So I really love that she points out and makes a note of the emotional complexity that people experience, specifically as it relates to trauma related to pregnancy, birth, and postpartum, and specifically for Black birthing people and women. In Chetina's work, she provides support through individual therapy, couples therapy, music, a podcast, and speaking engagements. She is really passionate about breaking the stigma and equipping people with tools for deeper understanding that leads ultimately to their healing. So let's meet Chetina. Welcome, Chetina. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I love that you are also a podcaster and you're doing this work in the therapy world and you have a deep understanding of how things could be better.
Right.
Let's just put it that way. I'm happy to hear from you and get into our chat today. But I would love for you to just say a little bit more about the work that you do, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, so hello, lovely people, lovely listeners. My name is Chetina Guadalupe. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist out of the Bay Area, California.
Mhm.
I run a virtual therapy practice for residents all over California, specializing in working specifically with individuals who experience stress or depression, anxiety due to life adjustment and changes, childhood trauma, as well as difficult relationships. I also really like to work with couples because of some of my more recent big life experiences of becoming a wife and a mom. I found it important to work with couples who are newly engaged, newly married, or new parents in order to make sure that, they have the space to figure out how to keep intimacy and togetherness going and keeping,
Right.
the family unit strong and having better communication with each other. So I primarily work with adults, although my background has a whole track list of children work. When I
Right.
got into the young adult world with university students and then more work with adults, I was like, I really actually like this too. And I found out that there were so many experiences of the inner child that needed work
Oh,
that I
yes,
found really profound. And I was like, okay, I can apply this childhood experience
for sure.
to adults and help their inner child have a voice. So I really have enjoyed doing that. My practice is fairly new, so it's still accepting clients because it just opened this past October. But it's mighty and it's growing. And,
Good.
outside of that, I do have a podcast. As mentioned, it's called Breaking Barriers, a mental health discussion. And I started it to be a space for people to talk about topics that are taboo or have stigma that they don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about, maybe even with the people closest to them. So I've
Oh, for
ranged
sure.
talking about a variety of topics from like people living on Section 8, people dealing with grief, specifically men, because sometimes that's hard for men to be able to talk about.
Yep.
I've had conversations about marriages that are polyamorous. Like this season, I've definitely had episodes talking about my upcoming one is going to be raising kids in the LGBTQ plus community.
Awesome.
I'm also going to be hopefully sharing a little bit of my story, especially like I had a doula, so working with my doula. I had an episode with her. I have an episode on becoming a father coming out because
Nice.
giving my husband some light because those experiences between a partner and their person can be vastly different for how you're in the room with delivery and labor. So I wanted my husband to be able to have the space to share his story and my own.
That's
And it's just
cool.
been a plethora of things that I've been able to talk about. And anytime I get inspired, I like to bring it on the platform. And it's
Hmm.
on all podcast platform, including YouTube as well.
Nice.
So that's a little bit about the work that I do. I don't think I'm missing any huge highlights, but I can say I do have special interest in like Black psychology, perinatal mental health, being able to do dream work because I found a
Mm.
lot of people experience like the trauma comes up in their dreams. Being able to
Yeah, for sure.
process, what
For
we don't
sure.
process in our waking life, we process it in our dreams. So
Hmm.
doing more work around dream work, somatic work, for
Hmm.
people to feel more attached to their bodies,
Oh, yeah.
as well as just a couple of other like decolonizing therapy. I always try to make sure that I'm doing something that's making my therapy practice in a way that I feel it should be and trying to fill in the gaps in the world. So that's just a couple of things that I specialize in. But if y'all want to know more, check me
Right, right.
out.
Yeah, and specifically today, you are going to be talking about Black birthing people and
Hmm.
experiences in the healthcare system
Right.
and with birth in particular as well. And can you, I guess, kind of start us off with the things that you are seeing and hearing and about people's experience and why you
Right.
want to talk about this today.
So I definitely feel like, of course, I've been my son just turned 1 at the beginning of May,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been married for about a year and a half. So we've had a lot of big experiences, life happening at the same
Right.
time,
Right.
and it's kind of one of those experiences where it's like you hear all this stuff about an experience, but then when you experience, it just hits you on a more deeper, profound level. So I
Yeah.
know when it comes to the Black body experience of getting pregnant, going through the process,
Mm-hmm.
labor and delivery, of course, a lot of what we tend to hear is there's a high maternal Black person body death rate. And then so a lot of people that I come into contact with, or there's even like documentaries on Netflix as well, but a lot of people that I come into contact with, like that's a top fear because
Mm-hmm.
we've heard it so much. Is like we automatically, our number one goal is, I want to do this, but I don't want to die. And then so I know even with me coming to to the situation, I was like, what are all the things that I could do that could make sure that I hopefully don't die?
Right.
Which is why I ended up getting a doula and trying to figure out who was most important in the room and trying to figure out, like, trying to get the right doctors. I tried to get the right midwives. I
Right.
tried to do everything I possibly could because I was like, I want all three of us to come home together and healthy and
Right.
without any bruises or mistreatment as
Right.
much as I could. And of course, unfortunately, we can have all the plans in the world.
Mm.
Things can go great. And
Mm-hmm.
then there can be parts of it that's like, wow, I planned so much and still none of it took effect or everything
Mm.
went out the window or harm
Mm-hmm.
was still done
Mm-hmm.
from the very beginning. And I think because of just knowing the history of Black people and just our experience with the medical system and never really having from the very beginning consent to a lot of the things that we experience
Right.
being experiments. Even when it came into the gynecology world, a lot of that was experienced on Black bodies,
Mm-hmm.
with people that were enslaved and didn't have consent. There was no painkillers back there,
Oh,
so
right.
it didn't have consent to experience all that
Right.
was happening and going on to their bodies. So when we think back on this stuff, it just creates a whole world of fear. And then so going into my own experience, I've had the opportunity to replay my narrative a bunch of times, and I know
Mm.
how important it is for people to own their narrative, and I went through the wave of so many different changes of how I felt
Right.
about it, from
Right.
being empowered to feeling really saddened and scared to being upset to being mad at everyone that was like a part of the medical team to then being just very grateful and then just loving. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
been all over the place, and I feel like
Right.
that's like a typical experience, because I really had to make sure I moved the energy of what different
Mm.
things were holding to put it in
Mm.
more of like a healing space. But like I said, getting to the end of it and realizing and thinking back on different ways where I advocated or I said things and they still weren't quite met. And then
Right.
having my own doula say, wow, like I had my client who was a white client at the same hospital as you within less than 2 weeks, and their experience was dramatically different than what yours was. That broke my heart, one.
Ugh.
But
Yeah,
it was
that's sickening.
profound.
Hmm.
Yes, it was sickening, it was profound, and it really made me think like, well, Shatina, how can you help people in whatever way that you can fill the
Hmm.
gaps, because people need healing. People need to know how to advocate for themselves. People need to have a better understanding. Because I'm like, I advocated for myself, but even at a point in my own birth story, it didn't matter until I told people I was a licensed marriage and family therapist, and it shouldn't have took that for people to listen to me
No,
and what I
no.
needed. So I know everybody can't say that, and then so it's like for the people that doesn't have something to be like, well, let me smack you in the face with this so you'll listen. It's like, man, like I want to be able to help people in some way, shape, or form, which is why I started adding the services to my virtual therapy practice as well, because I was just like, wow, like I'm looking for all these things and looking for all these helps, and there isn't even things that I feel like I am receiving help with
Yeah,
on the back end either. So that gives a little bit
for
of like,
sure.
what inspired me.
Right, and that, yeah, I'm sure there's a lot in your experience that unfortunately, we're not going to be able to hear all
Mhm.
of it
Mhm.
today because, right, it can be so complex.
Right.
There's so many parts, but I really do appreciate so much how you touched on the complexity of it, that you can have more than one feeling at a time, and there sounds like they were just kind of cycling through as you were experiencing them, and that
Mhm.
is, I think, just so real,
Right.
so real. I believe a lot of people can identify with that
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
as
I
well.
100% agree. And I definitely feel like I'm noticing just among different people, because I've talked to so many mothers, of course, at this point, even in
Hmm.
processing my own labor and delivery. And I've even just noticed a difference in where people sit with things of how long their labor and delivery was. So,
Hmm.
like, there are some people that I talk to that are Black, and it is healing. And they're like, I had the most amazing experience. And it could be in the same chain of hospitals that I was in, but they had an amazing one, and
Hmm.
their experience was much more like, I feel like I was robbed of my experience because it happened so quick. And
Hmm.
I don't feel like I felt all the pains and all of this and all of that. And
Yeah.
then you have someone like me that had to be induced and labored for 3 days and was in the
Hmm.
hospital for a week. And that made it prone to so many different people coming in and out of the room.
For
People
sure.
not being able to keep up with what
Mm,
the
mm,
plan was, like
mm.
people not knowing what the plan was at all. So it was so interesting to me to sit back and reflect on like, wow, somebody that was quick had their team, and so everybody knew probably what to do and everybody was up to speed. Whereas some people, it kind of gets lost. And I can only imagine when COVID was happening and there was only the birthing person in the room, so
Yeah.
much gets lost.
Yeah, that really messed up a lot of stuff. COVID,
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's you touched on a little bit already, the a bit of the trauma of the experience, and also the system, the
Right.
healthcare system, I guess, at large, having its own inconsistencies, but very specifically treating Black and brown people differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's sort of like the perspective that your doula gave you, um, is both incredibly sad and difficult to hear, but I imagine also really validating in some way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
Lets me know I wasn't making it, I wasn't making it up in my mind. And my husband is also, a brown person. He's an Islander, Japanese and Filipino, and even his experience in seeing how he was being treated was different than what she saw of a white father. And
mm,
just the respect that wasn't there. Some people had respect, and then some people were just totally disregarding him as if he wasn't a part of the experience as well.
well,
So it gets really, really, really tricky in that way, and there's just so much that people of color hold in trying to figure out how to navigate and advocate for yourself when you're in a room full of different professionals. And I feel like that's very
right.
historically, you're told to not question the professional or not question the leader or not do X, Y, and Z, or you could be reprimanded. And of
Mm,
course, nobody wants to be reprimanded when your life is on the line or feel like somebody's going to give me not the most tentative love and care because maybe they get in their feelings or they're upset because I said something to them. It's like a fear of walking like this thin line of eggshells of like, should I
mhm.
say something? Should I not say something? or not even properly knowing all the terms, not knowing exactly
Oh,
like,
sure.
what people are whispering about. And, lucky for me, I'm such a, I'm such a nerd in wanting to know. I've read, listened to books, listened to podcasts, everything. And because I had heard something, because I had to be induced, I didn't get through all of the educational classes that the hospital where I birthed at had. And my doula wasn't able to get me all the information I needed either.
Mm,
So some of it came from just previously when I had heard certain terms. So when nurses or doctors were
mm.
whispering, I knew like, well, wait a minute, can y'all tell me too? Because I know what that means. I know exactly what that means. So I need you to explain to me instead of just talking around me about what is going on. But if you're not informed, and a lot of the time people are not informed,
Right.
um, you don't really know how to speak up about those things, or even figuring out how can you become informed so that you know to speak up about those
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you find that you know, having a doula, how was having a doula supportive in the process and even in helping you maybe feel empowered if that was part of it?
Hmm. Um, I was we were very intentional about who we wanted in the birthing room because of the fear
Mm.
of I don't want anyone doing anything of what I've heard could happen in this room. And I know I'm gonna be out of it. I'm trying to push a little small human out of me. And I know my husband is gonna be like, whoa, she's trying to push a small human out of her. So we wanted to make sure that we had someone that would have like the education, even more so than the personal experience, but the education to know when things are wrong. And that's where a doula comes in different than maybe like your family members or your friends. Because our
Mhm.
family members or friends are going off of like, their own personal experience and what they
Right,
see. But the
right.
doula comes in with information and, kind of emotion, being able to handle it a little bit better.
Right, right.
When it's your family member, they're going to get it's you. They don't want
Mhm.
certain things
Of
happening to you,
course.
but
Yeah.
cannot come across and land in the way that you may have hoped. So it was helpful to have our doula there in the sense of one, it was another pair of eyes in the room. Of course, they knew my plan, but of course, it even got tricky, unfortunately, for the doula. And I've processed with my doula as well because we're great friends at this point. But it got interesting for them as well because I think at a certain point they also felt like, okay, when should I say something? Because I had a black doula.
Mhm.
So then it was like, when should I say something? What is appropriate for me to say? Because
Mhm.
I already don't get that much respect. Like a lot of doulas don't get respect in the
I've
birthing room.
I know. I've heard that and I've experienced that in some ways with my own
Mm-hmm.
doula as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah. And
so
so it
upsetting.
gets tricky. Yeah, it gets
Mhm.
tricky because maybe there was moments where I was like, dang, I wish they would have said something, or
Mhm,
dang. But
mhm.
then I was like, wow, they were having an experience all in themselves because of all the things that were
Oh.
actually happening and people not already listening. And then, but it was helpful just to know we were all in this together. And I knew
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, because I started getting afraid before my birth happened because I was being induced, because I wasn't going to have any of the original team that I wanted. And I had to like tell myself, like, Shatina, more than anything, your doula and your husband know what you want. So if all else fails, look to them. They got
Mm.
you. They
Mm,
know
mm,
you. They
mm, mm.
got you. This should give you some type of peace.
Right.
Um, and then just being able to have my doula be that stand-in person, because lots of stories you hear people saying, "Oh, I was updating my family. Oh, I was doing this. Oh, I was doing that." We already said, "I can't focus on this. So can you do this thread
Yeah,
of
yeah.
mention thread of everybody. Let them know when you're going to update them." And that was the most profound thing we could
Mhm.
have requested in the beginning because we really needed to focus and pay attention on the matter that was at hand rather than
Yeah.
trying to juggle what everybody else had going on as well and their emotions and everything.
Mhm.
So she did phenomenal with that. And then even being able to, if there was moments where I was like, hey, this doctor was disrespectful, or hey, like I need to go back and talk to this person, because lots of times, and this is a conversation I had, lots of times the doctors get desensitized.
Oh,
They
right.
forget that although you have a floor, and it was a full floor, although you have a floor of people that you're going to see, these are all brand new people. You don't know if it's their first child, if it's their
Mhm.
third child. You don't know if they lost a baby before this child.
Right, exactly.
You can't enter in the room just in like this monotone. This is what it is, and this is what it. You cannot do. You can't do it.
Oh, but
And
they
so
do.
and they do. They
Right,
definitely do.
right, right.
And so I definitely had to have a moment where I was like, hey, the nurse was on par with it because I happened to have a black nurse at that moment. I'm like, you need to go and get that. go and get the doctor. So the doula went and talked to them on the side, was like, she needs this because she's
Okay.
upset. This is how she's feeling. This wasn't right. And I brought the doctor
Oh,
back in.
nice.
It wasn't pretty for her. She was very upset. Her emotions were in the way. She was trying to overtalk me, which is why I had to wave the I'm a therapist flag to get her to be like, oh, okay, maybe she does know what she's talking about. But her approach was like, hey, I needed to have compassion for her because she goes around and she's talking to a million different families at different points. And I'm like, you're missing it. You need to have compassion for me. This is my
Mm-hmm.
first child. So
Mm-hmm.
although you're gonna birth a lot of different babies, I'm gonna remember this. This is
Mm-hmm.
my first introduction. And in the back of my
Mm-hmm.
mind, I'm still thinking, I just don't want to die. Like that's where my mind is.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that too. I mean, yeah, when you had started off, is speaking to how a lot of Black and Brown families are hearing these terrifying statistics
Mm-hmm.
and hearing how people are being mistreated in the
Mm-hmm.
birthing space. Uh, that I mean that how does that not impact you
Yeah, exactly.
while you're in that environment specifically? I mean,
Exactly.
I know you're being really intentional trying to push that out of your mind, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes I feel like it takes a certain level of like a separation of yourself. I
Mhm.
call it my I went into a warrior mode, a mode I didn't even know existed within myself. Because
Nice.
not only was I fear of like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen, but it was like birthing itself is scary.
Right,
Just
right.
hearing
You don't
about
need
like
all
this
this
is
extra stuff.
birthing
Right,
and
right,
what
right.
you've seen, and whether it's a cartoon or a movie or whatever, and they're like, oh my gosh. So you're already dealing with, I don't know
Yeah.
what this is actually gonna feel like on top of everything else that you've heard. And I think for me, like dropping into like my son and my life is depending on me. I
Mm.
have to be able to push through and speak up even when I'm loopy. I have to
Mm.
make vocalize when something's uncomfortable. I have to ask questions even if I don't understand it, it doesn't make sense. And I have to have this level of like strength that just came out of nowhere in order to be able
Mhm.
to push us through, because I
Mhm.
know big decisions have to be made at certain points. And I
Mhm.
needed just to have this level of strength even for my little baby. I just really felt like he's counting on me. So
Mm.
Chetina, you've got to gather your bits and do this. So it's like my brain kind of like, and I'm a person that has anxiety. It was the first time I didn't feel no anxiety at a certain point.
Mm.
I didn't feel like too overwhelmed. I knew, okay, we know all the possibilities, but when
Mhm.
my mind just zoned in and focused on
Right.
that,
Yeah.
it was profound.
Right. Yeah. You're
Hmm.
just there. You have a singular purpose.
Hmm.
And there's no doubt in there about that.
Right.
Yeah, that is really powerful. That is really powerful. So you started talking about ways that you were advocating for yourself, and I think there's so much value in what you're describing.
Hmm.
And to your point, a lot of people kind of don't either know that they can do that, um, or it's hard to do that even if they
Right.
want to. So like what are ways that that people can advocate for themselves through the whole process from
Right.
from wherever they are on the kind of reproductive journey, so to speak.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Um, I would definitely say know yourself. Know yourself is one of the most important things in regards to, if you don't already or you haven't been to therapy, I'm always going to recommend a little bit of therapy in there,
Yes,
but
yes, I'll
be
double down
able
on that.
be able to understand like what your triggers are, because
Mm,
some people may not even realize that they have a lot of triggers in the medical room, whether it's for sensory
right.
purposes, whether
Right.
it's for talking to somebody that you feel like is in a power position, whether it's
Yes.
from trauma, honestly, and not feeling like you've ever had power over your body. Like it could be a lot of different
Mm,
things, and it can send you into a trauma response, and then maybe you can go into spaces and have a game plan, but you're like, oh, it didn't quite turn out how I wanted to, and you're like, but why? I had all these questions and I couldn't bring them up. It's so important to be able to like know yourself. You can write it down, have a little list. You can carry a little card with you that like, lets your doctor know this makes me feel comfortable while I'm having a conversation with you. There are different things like that, or have something like that's very reminds you of a safe place or a safe space, and like keep it in your hand, or keep like a little soft object or something that helps you to be able to regulate yourself when you're going into these medical spaces and knowing that you need to be able to speak up for yourself. I feel like trial and error. We're not gonna always get things right the first time. And then
Right.
so when you're having a conversation, if you're like, "Hey, it happened again," like I still didn't say what I wanted to say.
Mm, mm,
It's okay. Give yourself the time to reflect, journal about it, talk to somebody that's a trusted person to figure out, okay, the next time I have an appointment, what are some points that I need to bring up? And like I said, it's always okay to write down. Doctors will
totally.
make you feel rushed.
Mm.
And mom and I'm like, where you got to go? Because this is important. So
Uh-huh.
so don't let like it can bring anxiety up in people because you're
Uh-huh.
like, I know I got 15 minutes and I know this. And sometimes they can come in just
Right.
very stoic and just like, all right, this is okay. What's the next question? And what's the next question? But it's
Mhm.
okay to try to slow it down and know that if you don't ask all the questions, send them an email. You have the space. There's no questions that don't matter because like I said, for people, whether it's your first or your fifth experience, this is still your life and your experience. So it's
Mhm.
important that you try to get the most out of it that you can and that you feel comfortable. And I definitely feel like, I went into it with a birthing plan. And there's a book that it slipped my mind to even write it down. I'm gonna probably send it to you so you can put it in the show notes. There is this book that I've been listening to after it and it changed my whole concept of like a plan and kind of like
Mhm.
how that can also be misleading and making us
Mm,
go
mm.
into there like A, B, and C is gonna happen. It must happen because when that doesn't happen, then what do I do? And in my
Mhm.
situation,
Mm.
it didn't happen. So just kind of like,
Right.
well, then what do I do? And then so being able to understand, don't have this concrete plan is important because you can go in advocating in that way, and then it kind of can set you up sometimes. Because if
Mm.
it doesn't happen that way, and then you weren't able to have flexible thinking of well, what to do if this falls through, that can leave you pretty traumatized as well. So it's kind
Mhm.
of like have options. Go in having options of what it could be and what would make you feel comfortable, and focusing more on the comfort of it, and feeling safe, feeling secure, rather
Mhm.
than tracking down this exact plan for things
Mhm.
to go how you want them to
Mhm.
go. And then, like I kind of mentioned before, if you need to call somebody back in there to express something to them, do it. For me, the response was, but I already had talked to you. My response to that was, I am under a lot of medication because I'm being induced. I'm not even fully here right now. I had some time to reflect. So now I know exactly what I want to say and what I need. So I need you to come
Nice.
in here and I need you to create the space to listen to me because
Nice.
this is important to me. And then no matter how the person may have felt, they eventually were able to hear where I was coming from, what they did wrong. They didn't really come too much back in the room, but they understood, okay,
Right.
she means business and she's not going to just let any old thing happen to her or anybody talk and say
Right.
whatever to her. So know that it's okay to bring people back in the room because that's what I mean by sometimes they're desensitized and we have to
Mhm.
remind
Mhm.
them, but I'm not. So I
Mhm.
need you to be able to treat this as if it's your first time ever birthing a baby and first time walking in and have that same excitement and curiosity and holding the space in a gentle way. And if someone gives you flack, it takes a lot to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, it
And if
does.
it doesn't quite, I always say you can stand up for yourself when your voice is trembling.
Mhm.
You're
Mhm.
still standing up for yourself.
Right.
So really being able to try and like push through in those moments, and if you can have a trusted person there for when you're like, I just don't have the gumption,
Mhm.
them being able to help kind of speak up for you on your behalf and be that support person.
Right. Yeah, you kind of did as almost assigned, it sounds like in a way your husband and your doula that if you weren't in the place to communicate the way you wanted or needed for
Hmm.
them to sort of like serve as proxy and uh, state what your needs are, which is really powerful too, because then it's
Hmm.
not all on your shoulders. Obviously, like you want to, and people in general want to be able to say what they need to say, but just to have that comfort that you can rely on somebody that you trust and has your back, that is really powerful.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, there are some things because I'm really big on owning your narrative, and like I told y'all, I went through all of the roller coaster emotions that could possibly happen, and then also just putting in a space of just being very grateful because I came out alive. I came out with not having to have a C-section. I came out with a healthy baby boy, even though he was only 4 pounds 10 ounces. Came out crying and screaming at the world and
Mhm.
latching on and just ready for fight. Like he came out completely fine and I didn't have any complications with laboring. It was just all that it took to get to that point. And there
Mhm.
were times where we really missed and dropped the ball. and in being able to advocate in the moment because of so much going on. And when that actually happens, I think that it's okay to know you also have options then too. Like, sometimes most time hospitals, I hope, allow you to send feedback in. I didn't do it because that's still my work to do. So I was
Mhm.
like, they're not going to listen. So I'm not about to keep wasting my time dipping into
Mm,
this because
mm,
they no.
mm. Right.
But at it's still, to a certain extent, what people tried to tell me was it still matters to write it because you just never know. And then, so if you have feedback to give, always give, the feedback you need to. If it is people that birthed with you and they are people that, you can write or send a message to, or it was like your midwife or your gynecologist, or
Mhm,
I mean, OBGYN,
mhm,
um, have a conversation with them because there's healing in those conversations as
mhm.
well.
I like
And
afterwards.
yeah, afterwards,
During
and
too,
because you
but
have to
yeah,
keep,
you're saying.
yeah, you have to
Mhm,
keep seeing these people. So it's like have the
mhm,
conversation with them. And then, sometimes when the ball is really dropped and you're just like, this was just very unfortunate, that's where grace comes in. And trying to just remind yourself, like, hey, like, man, despite my experience, let me still just try to give people grace. Like, that's literally the saving grace, no pun intended.
mm, mm,
Give them grace because maybe it's just was too much happening in the moment and the ball was just meant to be dropped. And some things you just can't have an answer or have understanding for. And so
mm,
anytime that I've had a gap, because there did come a point where my doula couldn't be my doula,
mm,
for a lot of Black people, we want the doula to be there to see what's going on. She couldn't see it because they had her holding my leg, counting me in, doing some of the things that they were supposed to be doing because there were so many people pushing out babies at the same time. They were running all over the place. So my
mm.
doula was guiding, and she wasn't supposed to be doing that. She was
Right,
guiding most of my birthing experience. And
right.
then so she couldn't even really look and see what my intentional plan was to make sure everything was going on because she's over here making sure that I'm counted down in between when there's nobody in the room with me and making sure we're trying to understand what the screen is saying and
Right.
we don't even know what it's saying.
Mhm,
So it got really, really difficult. And that was like, well, this is really unfortunate. There's nothing we could have did about it, but just be happy that we all came out completely fine and it was safe. So I had to just say like, hey, give grace and get healing around like the grace of like all the things that were happening and just being blessed and fortunate of how it turned
mhm,
out. And
mhm,
then being like, okay, I know I want another one. So for next time, what can I do to try and vocalize some more important points that I heard? Or if I have someone I know that's trusted and loved, if they're going through it, these are some things I can share with them because that's
mhm,
healing in itself for you too.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, that can also be really powerful because it's like taking the emotional turmoil of what happened kind of off of your shoulders a bit. And I think what's important too is you're not saying forget about it. You're
Right.
not saying pretend like it never happened. You're not like denying your own experience,
Mm-hmm.
but it's kind of like a both and. Like this
Mm-hmm.
stuff happened,
Exactly.
and I can also create a little bit of space to release, whatever that is.
Yeah, and you can create space to feel empowered because
Mhm.
you're making it through and you're probably doing
Yeah.
things that you never imagined you would experience or go through and
Mhm.
have the strength that you probably didn't even have. And
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
something profound to stand on. Because no matter what, I know for sure that gives me power when I'm scared. That gives me power that got me
Right.
through postpartum anxiety and depression. That got me through so much. It's being like,
Right.
dang, but you were a warrior. Like
Right.
you beasted this. Like you got a profound strength you didn't even know you had.
Uh-huh.
And so
Right.
whenever I felt down on myself, that's where the motivating affirmations
Mm.
really can kick in to help you just start to try and reframe how things were so that you don't, kick yourself when you're down because that could probably trigger postpartum depression as well.
Well, sure, like all kinds of stuff like shame and
Mm-hmm.
guilt and all those nasty
Mm-hmm.
feelings. Um, and I think you're talking about too something that's important, like with empowerment in particular, is that you're you're saying like if it in some ways like overcoming or dealing with going through what could have potentially been a traumatizing experience, um, there's a way to ground yourself in your strength as well.
Mhm, 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 absolutely, and also know I don't know if a lot of people know this, but you can play music Some people may know, but some
Mhm.
people may not. You can play music while you're in the labor and
Mhm.
delivery. You can play
Mhm.
anything while you're in there. And so I definitely had a playlist. And then when the going got tough, like, I'm a person that believes in God. So I had everyone in there praying when it got to a certain point of, we don't know what we're going to do anymore.
Mm.
So I'm gonna give you a moment to think about this. So I prayed, everything worked out beautifully, but helping have music was so helpful and grounding to me
Mhm.
because when so much sensory noises was going on, when like, they're saying your son is getting sleepy and the heart rate is looking a little weird, like all these things and all these noises and just everything that could just be uncomfortable, the hospital can already be uncomfortable for
Mm.
people. I was able to zone out and like listen to something,
Mhm.
kind of listen to in my day-to-day life that brought me joy. And that
Right.
helped me like just fluff out some of the sounds, listening to a trusted voice, focusing on that voice. That
Right.
helped me to fluff out some of the noise, metaphorically and physically speaking, some of the noise that was
Right.
happening. And so that's really, important. And then, I don't know if we have time today, but there's a whole part of just what professionals can do to
Well,
make
yeah,
sure.
I was. I know that we can at least touch on it. We can at
Mhm.
least touch on it. Because right, I mean, there's sort of like the inside job, so to speak,
Right.
of getting
Hmm.
ourselves through the process. But going back to where you started, the system has some spots that could, you know, to be delicate, could really use some improvement. But what
Hmm.
are things if, like, let's say a provider is listening, or somebody who's supporting a Black person birthing, what they can do to help create a good experience or support a healthy
Hmm.
experience.
Yeah. Um, I would say even starting with like how I said with advocating for just people in general is knowing yourself. So understanding like your biases, your personal experiences, what you've heard and what you've seen thus far about the experience and trying to keep it in a space of a space of it's not a one size fit all type of ordeal. So a lot of times people are in the field for years. It's still okay to go back and see it with brand new eyes like because you might be able to
Mm,
learn something new, you might get a new refreshed perspective instead of just saying I already know what I'm doing. That's when you're entering into into the point to where you're probably not doing the best that you do because you already know what you're doing. It come a dime a dozen. You deliver babies all day or you're working with birthing people all day, but it's like like I said, you have to keep that fresh pair of eyes because everyone's experience is different. New information is coming out all the time, so trying to stay on top of that. um Being willing to listen even when you feel like you already know the answer or you already know what's going on or you're having your own emotional response. So
mm,
knowing yourself and knowing what to do when you're having an emotional response.
mm,
Because
mhm.
maybe you feel like, how dare somebody like question what it is that I'm doing? I know what I'm doing. Or I'm just trying to help and maybe they're yelling at you. Like trying to figure out how to regulate yourself so that you still have that listening ear for
Yeah.
what it is that a person is wanting and needing in that moment. Um, of course, training, being trauma informed. Just because you read about trauma or you know about trauma doesn't make you trauma informed. So
Mm,
being able to get the appropriate trainings for being culturally informed and understanding, if you work with a vast array of people, is really important because my the birthing experience for Black people is different than the birthing experience for Hispanic people. It's different from the birthing experience from the Asian population. It's different from the birthing experience from the white population. It's different all the way across the board. But the same commonality is we're birthing babies.
mm, mhm.
So remembering what's common, but also remembering the difference of backgrounds that people are holding. And even as I expressed earlier, you can be people that are in the same cultural population, but then you could have an amazing experience. So it doesn't mean
Right.
again that it's a one size fit all. So having capacity to try and like hold all of it,
Mhm.
and be able to find your way of what kind of provider do you want to be? What is the legacy you want to leave? What is the work that you want to do? What is the difference that you know that you truly can make by understanding and knowing like
Yeah.
all of this information? And then a big thing is, especially for working with Black birthing bodies, believe them the first time.
Mm,
Believe them the first time. People should not have to reiterate the pain they're feeling. People should not have to tell somebody no. People should not have to just repeat themselves when they're in such a tender stage, whether it's pre or post. Believe them the first time and work through that. No matter what research says or what you think you may know, they're the only one that's feeling that experience in their body, so they're the expert at that moment. So if you do that, I feel like that changes the game. in a
Mm-hmm.
lot of ways and can save
Yep.
people a lot of grief.
Oof, that's a really great one. Yeah, massive, really.
Hmm.
One for us to close on today. I know there's obviously so much more to talk about, and I know you're going to be talking about some of this on your own
Hmm.
podcast and your experience, and work that you're doing, things that you want people to learn and know and understand. So that will be sure to have that as a resource as well.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Be on doula, becoming a father, becoming a mother, and just being a person that has birth. Period, because that's where I get to on my podcast. I can go a little more in depth
Yeah.
of what it is that actually happened if you're interested in the intricate details.
Hmm.
So hopefully,
Yeah.
what was shared today though was helpful because my experience really made me go into a bunch of training, talk to a bunch of people, and try and figure out, which has been healing for me as well, trying to figure out how to just
Right.
consolidate the process and make it better for people so that people can have more beautiful stories and we don't keep having to say, I just don't want to die. Like,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
you can be like, I'm just excited to meet my baby. Like that's my main
Right.
focus. So
Right. Right. Thank you so much for sharing parts of your story and advocating and sharing these like really, really important um, perspectives and understandings today.
mhm.
I appreciate you
Yeah.
being with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. This is a lovely platform. Continue doing what you're doing because people
Thanks.
need it.
Thanks. Same to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, same to you. You have amazing conversations that people need to hear, and so awesome. I'll send people your way.
Thank you.
You can find Chetina and connect with her on her website, alwayslivelovely.com, and on Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and her podcast, Always Live Lovely. If you feel like this conversation with Chetina would benefit somebody that you know, please do share so that whoever is out there that might be suffering or might need to hear themselves reflected in her story and in the professional work that she's doing, it is totally worthwhile to send it along. And if you yourself are in the transition to parenthood or in the early postpartum, I've created a course specifically for new moms that is a guide on how to deal with the transition into parenthood, how to deal with the loss of sleep, how to notice if you might be dealing with any type of perinatal mental health condition, and skills and tools that can help you right now today. It's an online, on demand course that is available as soon as you get to it. It's very easy to listen to or watch wherever you are, and you can pause and come back to it at any time. I've specifically built this for parents who are suffering or who might be suffering and can't quite get to therapy yet. There's so many people out there who are trying to get to a therapist and have a long wait time. So this is built for you. It is built for them. Please do go check that out at wellmindperinatal.com/courses. Thank you so much for joining us on the Mom and Mind podcast. Until next time.